John McMullen's here to talk some football. Football at 4 is what we call it. Follow him on Twitter at JF McMullen for all your Eagles news and notes, all information for the NFL. Johnny Mac, how was your 4th of July, man?
Spectacular.
Yeah?
Celebrating the independence of this country, if people did not know that.
Now, I was listening on Wednesday. I wasn't in studio with Gil, and you said you were going to try your best to not be day drunk for Josh yesterday. Did you succeed in that?
Yeah, I succeeded.
That was not a convincing yeah.
All right.
Well,
you succeded in becoming day drunk?
I succeeded in becoming day drunk. Yeah. I just passed off. That's one of the great parts of life, day drunk. And now you shouldn't have a lot of ability to do that. But when you have an off day and you have an ability to have a little bit of fun and have an adult beverage with some friends, that's one of the great passions of my life.
It really is special. And that's one of the many things that makes this country so great.
It's only for the privileged.
It's only for the
Day
privileged.
drinking.
Well, if you're day drinking too much, yeah, you got some issues because you're not accomplishing much.
Correct.
Because I don't accomplish much, but I do it.
And it's not something that should be done frequently. Now, we're joking about July 4th, and I hope everyone.
And some people will get mad by this and say I'm not advocating it. So
no, of course not. And we're having fun. We hope everyone else out there had fun yesterday and continues to have fun into the weekend, but most importantly, all jokes aside, safe fun. And unfortunately, with holidays and July 4th, and I don't know what it is, John, with July 4th and NFL players, and I'm not trying to be funny in any means, but unfortunately, yesterday there was a tragedy in the NFL. Now, good news is when I say tragedy, there wasn't a death, but unfortunately, Dolphins defensive tackle Kendrick Norton had to have his arm amputated, and he remains hospitalized after a car crash in the Miami area early yesterday morning. And that's kind of the story that's been driving the NFL for obvious reasons today and yesterday. So I just wanted to lead that with you and your thoughts.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's just horrible, and that's a situation where it happens everywhere in our society and life in general. There's accidents, and to me, it doesn't have anything to do with football at that standpoint. I mean, it's just about his life and the fact that something very, very serious happened, and obviously his football career is over. Now you just hope he can live a long and fulfilling life in another way. And that's all you can hope for. But anytime that kind of situation happens, whether it's the NFL, whether it's professional sports, whether it's somebody in the neighborhood, whether it's somebody anywhere, it's always horrible and unfortunate. And we all feel for people when bad things happen like that. And there's no other word you can use than unfortunate. And it's a shame. And I don't even think football is even in the realm of that. You can't even get to that level where you start talking about football, what it means to the Miami Dolphins. You got to think about the person, and who cares about how it affects that team, to be honest.
Yeah, it does. It's true, John. And it again, this is something that you and I have talked about a couple of weeks now. I don't know that there's any. I don't know that the level of anxiety that front office types have and even coaches have between the end of mini camp and the start of training camp, I don't think it can even come close to matching. The anxiety they have now can't be matched by any anxiety they have during the season. During the season, everybody's in on to the next one mode, as Bill Belichick would like to say, right? But during this 6-week stretch, everybody is just always worried. They go to sleep worried that they're going to wake up and something terrible like this is going to happen.
Yeah, we have talked about it. It is that time of year where every coach doesn't want to get a phone call. And there's obviously different perspectives. I mean, it could be trouble as far as legal implications that will keep a player from playing or get a player suspended. This goes far beyond that, as I said.
Mm-hmm.
Football is not even in the conversation. But, yeah, I mean, and I talk about it more from the perspective that players that get into trouble, and I always say, from 12 years of Catholic school, one of the things that stuck with me is idle hands is the devil's workshop. Not a big religious guy, but it always made a lot of sense to me in the fact that if you don't have something to do, and we just joked about it with day drinking, if you don't have something to do, you're more apt to get into trouble. And I think when you talk about young men who have a lot of money, who have 6 weeks off and can do whatever they want to do, basically. And a lot of people aren't in that situation financially. Some bad things can happen, and that's why coaches worry. And they always send their players off with a sort of a speech and warn them of some of the pitfalls out there. And you just hope to get through it. But when training camp starts out, what you said, Geoff, is correct in the fact that everybody's busy.
Right.
And when you're busy, when you're at the facility, generally bad things aren't going to happen.
You have so much more control over what is going on in a player's life and his environment when he is in your confines. Even when he's going to home, you work them all day long. They're usually exhausted. They go home, especially in training camp, right? And they go home, they wake up, and they're right back to the office.
Yeah, and it is a much more structured environment, and that could be anywhere in life. And if you do have a much more structured environment, you're going to be much more effective. You're going to accomplish much more, and it's much less likely that you're going to get in trouble. I think that's kind of common sense.
Yeah, no doubt. All right, so here's the latest. A top 5 list has come out, John. So, of course, we have to get your reaction to it as we do with all top 5 lists that come out. And the latest one came from Daniel Jeremiah, who you know well, I know well, we all know well. And it came at 10:45 this morning, and he's out in San Diego usually. So he probably woke up 7:30 and thought, I need to tweet out a top 5 list. My top 5 MVP candidates for 2019. Number 1, Carson Wentz. Number 2, Pat Mahomes. Number 3, Saquon Barkley. Interesting number 3 there. Number 4, Phillip Rivers. And number 5, Ezekiel Elliott. My question to you, this is interesting because he's a respected analyst. Louis Riddick has been tweeting the similar things. It's not just that people expect success for Carson Wentz. They just expect that he's going to kind of hit the ground running here and go back to what he was 2 years ago, hit the ground as MVP frontrunner.
Yeah, and I think everybody is trying to get ahead of the curve, and everybody wants to get noticed, and everybody, it's easy to pick Tom Brady. It's easy to pick Drew Brees. And if they play at a high level, so what? I mean, we all expect it. I think everybody does. And you look at Carson and the fact of where he was back in December of 2017, he was going to be the MVP of this league. And then you kind of add into it, it generally takes a full year at least to feel comfortable getting back from an ACL. And from Carson's standpoint, it was more than that. It was also an LCL. And there was other damage on top of it. So I think people have seen him in the spring, and he looks healthier. He's taken the next step from, I think, a maturity standpoint as far as nutrition and handling his body. He's lost weight. He seems to be going more in the mode of Tom Brady and what he's done from a physical standpoint. And I think they're putting all that together and coming up with, we already know the ceiling. The ceiling's an MVP level. We've seen that. We've seen it with our own eyes. And if he stays healthy, which is a big if, and I think that's a legitimate concern because of his history, he's going to be in the conversation. If he's out there for 16 games, he's going to be top 5. I don't think there's any question about that.
When talking about this list, John, Saquon Barkley at number 3 is interesting because we all know the year he had last year, but now it's like, all right, is this the standard for him? A lot of people are expecting a dip, but some aren't. Where do you put Saquon Barkley in the conversation of MVP.
Yeah, I don't put him nearly that high, and it's not a criticism of Saquon Barkley. I think he's a tremendous player. I think he's going to have he's going to be the impetus of that offense. Everything with the Giants has to run through him. He's one of the more well-rounded running backs. I just don't think a running back can win it in this environment. So he might be the best running back in football, but a quarterback's going to win MVP of this league. And if it's not a quarterback, it's probably going to be a defender like an Aaron Donald or somebody like that who puts together an amazing sack-filled season with forced fumbles. I could potentially see that, although even that would be rare. I mean, if you go back to Adrian Peterson winning the MVP, and what year was that, Geoff?
2010, right? When he came back from the knee injury and had 2,000 yards? Yeah.
It's not that far ago, but it seems like eons ago. That's how
did Gurley not win MVP 2 years ago, or was he Offensive Player of the Year? I forget. Okay.
Yeah.
I think that you can do it as a running back. You just have to be a running back on a team that, wins 11 or 12 games and maybe with a young quarterback
You do. That's another part of it. You got to win 12, 13 games, and the Giants aren't going to win 12. There's just no way.
A man who does not believe in Daniel Jones right here.
More so Eli Manning.
Or both.
It doesn't matter. Or the rookie quarterback. They're just not going to be in that conversation. So that's part of it as well. I do think there is a big difference. I mean, even though it doesn't sound like a big difference, there is a big difference from being MVP and Offensive Player of the Year. Yeah, I could see a running back win Offensive Player of the Year. I can't see him win an MVP. That's just the value of the quarterback position. But if I were rating running backs, I would probably put Zeke's chances number one, and then Saquon in probably that number two category, because the other dynamic running backs, Alvin Kamara, I think he's not going to get enough touches. He's more of a limited guy. You got to have him on a pitch count, and Todd Gurley's got the degenerative knee now, so I don't think he's going to be in that conversation any longer as well.
Yeah, McCaffrey really might be your number two behind, if you were trying to bet, right?
Yeah.
Well, if a running back wins MVP, and it's not Ezekiel Elliott, who would be your number two choice? And I think McCaffrey would probably be that guy, because you're right, Kamara is always going to be in Drew Brees' shadow.
McCaffrey can't touch his shoulders, though, right now, currently.
What?
How big? See that picture?
I haven't seen that. Yeah,
he is massive.
Oh, he went the DK Metcalf route, huh?
Yeah,
Dude,
he did.
He is huge,
and he is a tremendous player as well, and incredibly well rounded. And he's a guy who has been, one of the knocks coming out of college for him was people were concerned he wouldn't be able to handle a huge workload. He has, and he's done more than that. I mean, he never leaves the field.
No.
Which is unbelievable.
He was their offense last year. I mean, he really was.
For a running back in this era to never leave the field, that's astonishing.
Ryan just showed me the picture, and I'm wondering if he's also going to be playing left guard.
or a suspension is in his near future,
or if that's happening.
But I digress. Who's a sleeper for you, John? When we're on the MVP, conversation.
Not a sleeper, Mitchell Trubisky.
Oh, thank you for saying. I can't believe how much love this guy is getting.
Didn't Gil say a sleeper, that he's a sleeper potentially for MVP?
No, I mean, Mike brought up the fact that his odds went down from, I think, 200 to 1 to 50 to 1. Which is true. So there's a lot of people betting on him. I can't imagine why. Now people are always looking for a value, as I said.
Sure.
If you bet on Tom Brady to win MVP, you're not going to win a lot of money. Mm-hmm. So they're always looking for value. But man, I don't see the value at all. So I do think you start looking at teams that have the potential to go maybe from worst to first, or third, at least third to first. So teams that people don't necessarily jump off the page as potential Super Bowl contenders. And then you look at their quarterbacks and who's in that conversation. There's always, if you look at the NFC South, I mean, you got 3 MVPs in the division already. at the quarterback position. So maybe if Carolina jumps out, Cam Newton's back in the conversation. Maybe if Atlanta jumps out, Matt Ryan's back in the conversation. But these are all typical names. So it kind of depends on what team you think is going to make that leap and go to maybe 8, 9 wins to 12, 13 wins and make a deep playoff run, and look at those quarterbacks.
I tell you what's interesting. 2 things come to mind from the top 5 list and then the conversation we're having. One is that, we're sitting here talking about Saquon Barkley or Ezekiel, what other running back could potentially win. And Aaron Rodgers, I don't know what the odds are, but with the new coaching staff.
It's a good one.
I would think if he's not in anybody's top 5 and the odds are pretty good, that would stand out to me as a really good bet to maybe say, hey, why isn't anybody talking about Aaron Rodgers? He's clearly the most gifted quarterback in the league, and if he's getting forgotten even a little bit, if it's 2-1 now, that's a good number to maybe put your money on.
I think if you're sleeping on Aaron Rodgers,
you're just asleep.
You've got issues. He's in that category. I probably should have brought his name up with the Bradys and Breezes. So that's on me. That guy's the most talented quarterback in football, and I think obviously, one of his issues in the past couple seasons has been staying healthy. Mm-hmm. And people have looked at the guys who have played to 40 at a high level, whether you go back to Peyton Manning or Tom or Drew now, and start to say, look, if you want to play that long at that kind of level, you got to be a certain kind of quarterback. And that's, I think, what you have to start questioning about Aaron Rodgers now that it's been consecutive seasons where he's been significantly banged up, the way he plays the position. And it's not necessarily, as I said, running quarterback versus pocket quarterback, but nobody extends plays better than Aaron Rodgers. Nobody has in the history of this game. It's not necessarily running with the football, but he's always looking to make that extra, whether it's dip, dive, duck, whatever,
dodge,
to get the football down the field. And he's paid for it recently. And he's now, 35?
Yeah.
So does he have to change the way he plays the game? Can he change the way he plays the game? And I think the second part is he's a headstrong guy. Is he going to accept less ability, less autonomy at the line of scrimmage? Because it seems like that's where Green Bay is heading. And I'm interested. Maybe that might be one of the biggest storylines of this season I'm interested in.
Yeah.
To see how those two coexist. Aaron Rodgers, new coach Matt LaFleur, how they coexist, I think is going to be one of the most interesting stories in the entire NFL.
That could be a match made in heaven, or it could be one leaving the other at the altar about 2 weeks into the relationship. So I agree with that. That's something to look at. Another thing, and Ryan and I, and this is really fascinating to me a little bit, John, because Ryan and I and Mike Gill talked about it a lot in our new podcast, the All In podcast, right, which is about gambling and fantasy sports. If you look at Tom Brady's numbers last year, they were not vintage Tom Brady numbers. And even if you just go look at the playoffs and how that team won and developed, they played better defense than they were given credit for, and they also ran the ball a lot more than people were accustomed to seeing. With Sonny Michel, their first-round pick, obviously throwing the ball to James Harris, but they have no Rob Gronkowski anymore. And he didn't have a ton of catches for them in the playoffs, but he had some really big ones. And they've got no Gordon, and so they've really got nothing that stands out to you as great weapons. And it seemed to me that they were already gravitating a little bit more to that running game and power offense. And I wonder if it's like preemptively, if Belichick and the Patriots are now starting to move away from being a Tom Brady-centric offense because they have to, and because the aging and inevitability. Eventually, this guy has to play like a little bit like he's aging.
Yeah, well, we've all said that. I've said that 100 times. And ultimately, it will happen. And I point to Peyton Manning. Mm-hmm. And I always say, I mean, if you look at Peyton winning his last MVP, scoring 600 points, that was that offense in Denver. And 2 years later, he was physically shot. So ultimately, when it does happen, it's going to happen quickly. But as far as numbers, I mean, and the Patriots, they've won so many different ways over the 20 years. Essentially, it's been 2 decades of Brady and Belichick, and they've done it in so many different ways because they've had to. And there's difference when you have Randy Moss on the outside versus what they had on the outside last season. Well, you got to be a different team. And this season, they don't have outside threats at the receiver position. You're talking about the Philip Dorsetts of the world. And, they're expecting Harry, who's a rookie, to be a starting receiver. Edelman's great, but he's a slot guy. And you mentioned now Gronkowski's gone. So, and then this is the brilliance of Bill Belichick, and I just talked about it. A quarterback's going to win MVP of this league. I'm pretty confident in that. I would say 95% sure. It's a passing league. We all know that. So Bill looks at that, and you mentioned it a little bit, Geoff. They relied on the running game, especially in the playoffs.
Right.
Everybody else is putting extra D-backs on the field. And we've said it in theory, is somebody going to look at this and see 210, 215-pound linebackers and say, you know what? I'm going to put a fullback on the field and I'm going to run it down their throat. Well, that's what Belichick did in the playoffs last season.
Yes,
Crazy.
And he's always ahead of the curve. He's ahead of the curve again. I do think they're going to be more run-centric. It might be ugly at times in the regular season, but when everybody else is going one way, Bill's going to go the other way. And I often joke about it. Everybody calls the NFL a copycat league. They're right, but nobody copies Bill. And the reason they don't is because they can't. Now, they've hired his coaches, but nobody's been able to copy what Bill Belichick does. And part of the reason why is because he always seems to be ahead of that curve. And hey, I look at from a fantasy standpoint, if you look at their offense and you look at their receivers, yeah, you're going to stick your nose up. But from a football standpoint, from winning football games, he's going to find a way. And I can't even necessarily tell you how, but I can tell you he's going to find a way.
The best that, arguably the best there ever has been in the NFL, Bill Belichick. John McMullen, the best there's ever been for 97.3 covering the Philadelphia Eagles. Catch him every day, Monday to Friday. Football at 4 is what we call it. If you miss any of the interviews or just want to listen to him again like Geoff and I do, go for it on YouTube at 973 ESPN. Follow him on Twitter at JF McMullen. John, have a great weekend. Any interest in the Summer League, NBA Summer League this weekend?
My interest is Sixers Twitter overreacting to the Summer League. And,
love it.
Turning everybody into...
Directly correlated to day drinking.
Partially.
Oh, that's great. All right, John, have a great weekend, man. Thanks.
All right, thanks.
See you, Johnny.
Enjoy it.